So my entry into the audio business was, yes, people offered me money, but I wasn't necessarily on the high end of the scale. But what compensated that was I was with a group of people, namely unedited. So Bernard the Champong, Andrew Spence, and Emma Stevens, the three-headed monsters of production. They not only paid me to produce for them, but they invested in me as well. They taught me the game.
Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Sidney Evans, and you're listening to another episode of Beyond the Threshold. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Beyond the Threshold. I'm your host, Sidney Evans, an award-winning audio editor and producer. On this show, I interview Black men and women working in media to highlight the lessons and experiences it takes to achieve success in the field. If you haven't listened in a while, that last statement may be a little bit surprising. So for the first season of the pod was exclusively for audio professionals. But after doing the first 15 interviews, I'm like, man, the names that were being brought up, the recommendations that were coming my way, I'm like, I got to open this thing up. So because there's so many other talented individuals who are not constricted to audio itself. I myself am an audio first guy, so I'll continue to heavily highlight those in the audio space, and I'm hold true to that promise and help bring more awareness for what they and what we do. And I'm actually going to hold true to that on today's episode and go a little bit beyond. But to give a little bit of a background for our guest today, he's an award-winning executive producer, writer, and musician from London who loves sound and storytelling as a whole. And his work has been featured on BBC Sounds, Radio 2, Spotify, The Independent, The Guardian, Pitchfork, Complex, Music Week, and Forbes. And I'm pretty sure he left out a few, but those are some impressive names right there, to say the least. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's guest, Christopher Mitchell. Welcome to the show.
Appreciate you, Sidney, man. Thank you for the intro, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I've seen your work, I've listened to the shows, and I'm humbled. I'm in great company, and I really appreciate what you do. So thank you for sharing your platform with me.
I appreciate that compliment, man. And after learning all the things that you've done and you going into depth, I'm sure there'll be appreciation for what you do as well, more so than I already have. So yeah, I don't like to beat around the bush here. We're going to get into the nitty gritty. Can you just share a little bit about your background, man, what your passions were in your youth, and what was the journey to where you are today?
Well, Black kid, born in London, from a West Indian background, Jamaica in particular. So my grandparents came to London from Jamaica in the 60s. And for those who, kind of want an idea of what London was like in the 60s, it was challenging. The reception in the UK was colder than the weather. So there was a lot of struggles there. And, social struggles, housing struggles, fitting in, being accepted, just being appreciated and embraced in the sense that you have a right to exist. There was a lot of that going on. So, I came along in the early 80s. I grew up in a place called Kensal Rise, which is in London, in the northwest side of London. And it was a very diverse community. So you had Black, you had African, Brazilian, Portuguese. It was a massive melting pot of culture. So I grew up around a lot of people. School, church was a big thing. So I come from a very strong church background. Mum is an evangelist. My grandma is one of those church OGs, always had the church fan, and we're, praying all the time. It's that, so, and it's really key in terms of mentioning, my early examples of authority were Black men. So my head teacher was a Black man. The local bishop was a Black man, and it had a really strong impression on me to say people who look like me and come from the same background as me can be in charge and can, make decisions and be in a position of authority. As per usual, with a lot of us kids who were raised in the rhythm, I had a deep love for music, which we'll get into later. So my mum was the choir director at church, so I grew up on choir music. It wasn't soul, it wasn't funk, it was choirs, people who could sing for real. That's the kind of music I was raised on. And eventually what would happen is I would eventually start to make music of my own. So, fell in love with hip hop music around about 92. So it was definitely 92. It was MC Hammer and Criss Cross. MC Hammer's stage performances just blew me away. Seeing Criss Cross, same age, same names, which is a key element of representation in my story. Seeing people do something that you aspire to do is really inspiring, and I can say that Crisscross is one of the earliest examples of that.
Didn't they open up for Michael Jackson or something? We're on the same tour?
Yes, they did. On the was it the Dangerous tour? Yes. So on my podcast that I co-host weekly called Breaking Atoms, shout out to Sumit Sharma, we spoke to Chris Schwartz, who was the CEO or co-CEO of Rough House, who Crisscross was signed to, and he said that they toured with Michael Jackson. So there's that kind of cultural synergy in terms of my earliest experiences being on the stage together. Fast forward, my love of music translated into becoming an audio producer, and I've got to give credit and all praise is due to my wife. You talk about my early interest, so there was video games as well.
She won't gonna let you go there. She won't gonna let you do that as a living.
Nah, she wasn't on it at all. I mean, even just getting a Nintendo Switch was a debate. I'm a big fan of wrestling. My cousin Jackie got me into it, and wrestling is part of my story in terms of how I got into audio production because I love the storytelling side of things. So one day, I was watching the wrestling with my wife. She wasn't watching it. Her eyes were on the screen, but she wasn't watching it. And I was telling my wife all these things that's going to happen in the match. And she's like, how do you know this if you've never seen it before? And she's just like, you know a lot of useless details about things. You should start a podcast. That's what she said. Fast forward again, she bought me a ticket to a podcasting event called PodX. I went, soaked up as much game as I could, spoke to a friend of mine who wanted to start a podcast as well, Sumit Sharma, who I mentioned before. And we started the Breaking Atoms podcast in 2018, and we literally released episode 227 this morning. So that's how we got into podcasting. We did a live session for the charity that my wife worked at the time. They did a crowdfunder, and £50 donation got you a free podcast production session. There was someone from an agency there, a very big agency in the UK, and they were like, hey, we're thinking of starting a podcast. Could you produce it for us? And we had no idea that what we were doing was podcast production at the time. So we said, yeah, of course we can. And, as we do, we figured it out as we went along. And that's how we got into the podcast production game. And, a few years later, Sumit and I have done some great things together and individually. So BBC, Spotify, Amazon, MTV. Our music's been used on Viceland, WWE, Hennessy, Jansport. It's been an amazing journey, and I finally feel like I am walking in my purpose and doing what I was sent to earth to do.
There are a lot of similarities in our story, man. Like, it's kind of eerie just thinking about it. But the thing I want to highlight is, so, because you mentioned there was like your early interest in it as a youth. And now that I think about myself, I did, maybe not audio specifically, but just media storytelling in general, paying attention to those details that nobody else pays attention to, that you might be like, man, this is, you don't think of it as a gift. You might just be like, this is just an observation. And in terms of what I know, this is basically useless information, like as your wife said. But just exploring that can be the catalyst for something bigger. But like for me, I was a collegiate athlete. I went to school for mass comm. I knew I kind of want to do something in communications. Initially I thought it was gonna be sports broadcasting. But the long story short, I graduated, didn't end up working in media. I started off in hospitality because I just had to eat, I had to pay bills, and I'm 5 years in. I'm like, life just happens. So because you mentioned like, but when you and your wife were sitting and y'all had that aha moment or whatever happened for you, like you're already married. Like I'm sure you were already working in some capacity. Like, so what was the I guess the internal struggle that you had between like, I know this is my purpose, but this is something that's going to have to put time into before I can really see a reward, as opposed to like, I have a wife. I don't know if you have kids, but you may have had a family. I have to balance that between what I have to do and what I want to do. Did you ever battle with that at all before you actually started getting into the thing and things started taking off?
So that's a really good question. So when my wife dropped the gem on me to say you should start a podcast, I wasn't necessarily working at the time. I was in between jobs. I was unemployed. And I want to be honest about this, Sidney. My mental health at the time wasn't good. It was not good. I was struggling internally, issues of, self-confidence. I was angry. I was bitter. I was depressed. Now, when I look back and I look at some of my habits and, you know, the sleeping patterns being disturbed and how it affected my diet and just my overall mood, I was very, very depressed, very, very low. I don't have children, or we don't have children. So the battle was really a battle with self. And you talk about how did I kind of overcome those battles. To be honest with you, I don't think I would have overcome them without my wife, because she was the one, like, she saw. It's always interesting how some people can see what you can do and be before you can. And I think she saw it. You know, my wife is better looking than me. She's smarter than me for sure. And she saw, she's like, you should get into this. Because you got to bear in mind, Sydney, she sees me go into the studio all the time, making music, producing music, releasing music, selling music, making money from music. I guess she probably thought, you know what, it's not that different. No, my husband is a super storyteller. He knows how, you know, I may not know the technical terms of walking around the studio and saying, you know, this machine does this and that, but I know how things feel, and I know how, you know, how to elicit a response from people. So that was the main struggle. Financially at the time, it was a bit tight because it was one salary. But what I did, the redundancy check that I got from my workplace, I kind of used that to start my audio career, if that makes sense. So we put a lot of that into Breaking Atoms. It kept me afloat for a while until I found a full-time job in the industry, which happened after Breaking Atoms released our first independent documentary, which was called Brooklyn's Finest, The Making of Reasonable Doubt by Jay-Z. That one took off and got us jobs in the industry, and people started calling.
Okay. So to back up a little bit, because I always, early on in the pod, I didn't want to get too technical. I ignored some of the technical things, but I came to realization that that's an aspect of it. So like when you're producing music and getting a studio and things like that, like what year was it, and then what tools, what DAW, what technology were you using at that time? I'm sure it's a little bit different, or maybe in the early stages of what people know to be like household name stuff at the time. And then once you went over into audio producing, not just making music, did you stick with kind of the tools that you're familiar with at that time, or did you have to, or was there were you forced to adapt to something different, or is just an open-mindedness and willingness to do it, to say, okay, what they see as the most useful in the music world may not be as useful as what's in this world as far as being an audio producer?
So my adventures I call it my adventures in the land of music. That's a reference for the music people out there. So I was never a producer, Sidney. I was a performer, so I sing and rap. So I write the lyrics and I go into the studio. But the engineers, I first went into the studio, a professional studio, I would say was around 1997. So I was really into my music. I wasn't sure what they were using at the time, but I do remember that session. We missed the last train home and it was like 1 a.m. So the studio engineer had to drive us from South London to Northwest London, which is, you know, a good hour and a half. But as the years progressed, the engineers that I was working with, a lot of them used Cubase. One of them, Chemo, used Sony Acid. I remember a few of them using Pro Tools, which some of them still do now. But as for me and my tools of choice as an audio producer, I use Logic. So where I am right now in my house, I've got a studio in the other room where I can record from home. And I use Logic for all my podcast production needs. It's the system, or the DAW, that my main producer at the time used. His name is Imperial Dave Walker. Shout out to him. So he set me up nicely with Logic, gave me some templates and some plugins, and I just used it and I like it. And I know that, for what I gather, is a lot of people in the audio industry, they use, you know, Adobe Audition and all that. But I've come to find out, and I've come to really reflect the working style of some of my favorite producers, you know, people like a Ninth Wonder or a Madlib. And it's to use the tools that you know how to use. So I've got my laptop here, I've got my Logic here, I've got my nice little plugins, I've got my Isotope and all that going. And I managed to produce world-class podcasts from my little room in Northwest London. And that's what works for me. So yes, I have tools. I've got Logic, I've got the laptop. But I think for me, my greatest tools as an audio producer are my ear and my heart.
Right. That's the skill. It's not the gear, it's the ear. I'm sure you've heard that billions of times. And then also
Absolutely,
the
and
heart.
I agree with
like,
that.
you know, the emotion, the feeling that you want to come along with it. That's the secret sauce right there. And I it's funny you mentioned, because you use Logic, you mentioned Adobe Audition, but So I started off in Logic when it used to take me like 5 hours to record a podcast episode, like literally, because it was super long and I was super inexperienced. But the reason I started in Logic because the bug for me to explore audio production was from a music production perspective and as far as like making beats and stuff. And then I quickly realized that I had like no musical talent. Not at that time. I was just I was approaching it from too technical of a standpoint. I wasn't allowed the feeling to come in because I'm just learning it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it was hard for me to translate. So I was like, man, I'm learning this stuff. I'm learning the foundations of audio, but it's not translating to anything that I would want to listen to or that I would want to play for anybody. Luckily, I had the foresight to say, well, let me pivot and just use this skill set for something else. And then that was around podcasting became super big and one thing led to another. And then once I really started working for like agencies and once I stepped my game up, I switched to Audition because it wasn't a music making platform. It was like a radio production platform technically. And so I've been using it up until this point, but now I'm getting back into making beats and I understand how to put feeling and I have a way different perspective from what I'm doing. So I went back to Logic and now I'm getting into sound design and they have these updates where now you can mix in, Dolby Atmos and a lot of capabilities that Adobe Audition doesn't have, and they don't update it at all. They stopped updating it a couple of years ago. So like, I can't continue to get on this road. So I'm making the transition back over to Logic to make a long story short. But to move your story along, did the music thing. What was the name of the podcast documentary you produced? Did you say where people started calling? What was that? What? Because a lot of, there's always, I guess you could compare that to like outside of music, like your first album, your first project, your baby, your thing. So what was your like?
For sure.
I want to use that to move the story along. What was the genesis for that idea, the execution of it, and then all the other things that came along with it? And did you kind of stick to that format, or did you just, as you learn more, started applying different things?
So the idea came about. So again, I've mentioned his name. His name is Sumit Sharma. He's my co-host and that's my guy. I call him Mr. Audacity because when he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And it sounds mad sometimes. Even in my head, I'm like, you sure? But I've learned to listen and get out the way and support wherever I can. So he had the idea of doing a narrative documentary on hip hop albums. The original idea was to do an audio documentary on Marsburg by Rock Marciano, which is a seminal underground hip hop album that dropped in 2010. I was in my kitchen, which is just to my right now, and I'm a dates guy. He calls me the actual factual because I remember the details. I know what came out, when, where, who did it, what they were wearing, what the smell was, everything, right? So I said to him, dude, it's 25 years of Reasonable Doubt, Jay-Z in like 6 months. Why don't we do an audio documentary on that? We're both big Jay-Z fans. So we got to work. And Sidney, let me tell you something, right? I look back now and I realize we produced a podcast, 5 episodes, over 55 interviews. We had never written a script for a podcast before, never did sound design. We were using Zoom. Like, you go back and listen to it now, it's so amateur. But we put it together in 2 months. And this is what I mean about the heart, right? So whilst we weren't necessarily technically proficient, we had the heart to tell this story. What we thought was going to be a story about the making of this album grew into something bigger and different. We kept hearing this thing with the guests, this is the family album. This is the family album. Jay-Z's name is on the front cover, but there were so many people involved, people who pulled their time, energy, resources, and money into making this album. So by the time episode 3 came about, we pivoted and we realized, okay, the story about this is how the streets crowdfunded this album and Jay-Z was backed by this group of early believers who really believed in him and poured time into his cup. We spoke to so many people who were involved in the making of the album. We spoke with... Oh, my mind is so blank. We spoke to artists, journalists, we spoke to engineers, so people who recorded the songs, because our thing at Breaking Atoms is we want to speak to the people whose names are in the fine print, because oftentimes those are the ones with the stories, right? So, we spoke to Ski Beats, who produced most of the album. We spoke with Joe Quindy, who's the engineer for the album. We spoke to the person who wrote the source review. We spoke to Marie Davis, who booked him for some of his early shows. And they gave a really rich and nuanced picture about what Jay-Z was like pre-Beyonce, which was another motivation because I realized that there are people out there who know nothing of Sean Carter pre-Beyonce. And it bothers me. It bothers me. So that was my personal motivations in getting involved. So yeah, 55 interviews. We had it mixed by my guy Imperial, who I mentioned before, and we put it out, Sydney. There wasn't necessarily a promotional plan or any kind of sustained marketing strategy. But what happened is that it caught the right ears. I remember the day we put the trailer out. It was like a short mini video that we put out on Twitter. And that was the first time in my life I realized what going viral meant. It was stressful. It was surprising and it was humbling. I think I got like 10,000 retweets that day. When the episodes came out, we were releasing them weekly and the response was so positive. We had to start finishing up episodes early and releasing them early because people were like, yo, where's the next one? Where's the next one? Where's the next one? People who were involved in the series, there's one gentleman by the name of Dart Adams. Google him. He's a legend. He's a journalist and a historian. And he said, this is a classic podcast series. So what happened afterwards is that the industry started hearing about this and started to seek us out. And eventually the phone started ringing like, we heard this, let's have a chat, let's have a coffee. Conversations happened, they kept happening. And eventually people put money in our pockets to produce shows for them. And here we are.
Okay, so that's actually a good segue because we can get a little. I always want to touch on the business side of things too. I don't one or other things you learn as a man early on is not count another man's pocket. So I don't want to get into much of numbers specifically, but I want to go to talk about the mindset of you because when people come to you, you have the leverage, right? So that's pretty much what happened in this situation. So what are you all's mindset? Are you just, like you said, just so humbled and flattered that these people see the value in what you do? I'm sure there's a level of that, but then there's also a level of, okay, people are coming with offers, numbers are being thrown out. Like what are our non-negotiables? What won't we do? What do we prefer to do? Now is the time to get a lawyer, get time somebody outside influence to start looking at this stuff. Like, what does that process look like?
So, it was a bit of everything that you mentioned. We were definitely humbled, and I want to be mindful because Sumit is his own person. Even though we work together, we still give each other space to know that we don't always agree on everything. I think we agree on most things, but we like to speak for ourselves. We were definitely humbled that people came, but you got to remember, for me, Sidney, I was still very green. So in spite of the success, in spite of the fact that this documentary went to number 2 in the music charts and we were right next to Drink Champs, the fact that it was in the Independent, the fact it was in Forbes and Music Week and we're getting all this mainstream press, I'm still green. There's things about audio production I still don't know. To me, it was no different to becoming a rapper the first time I went into a studio. I didn't necessarily know about cadence and taking breaths during the delivery and enunciation and all these kind of things. So when people came to us, I was in a position where, yes, you are the prettiest girl on the block right now, but there's still ways that we can make you look even more attractive. So my entry into the audio business was, yes, people offered me money, but I wasn't necessarily on the high end of the scale. But what compensated that was I was with a group of people, namely Unedited. So Bernard the Champong, Andrew Spence, and Emma Stevens, the three-headed monsters of production. They not only paid me to produce for them, but they invested in me as well. They taught me the game. They taught me the business side. They taught me about IP. They taught me about how you work at the BBC, how you move when you're in a room. It was holistic training. I often say the time I spent at Unedited, which was 2 years, not only did they pay me for my work, they also invested in me as well.
That's a great point because, the saying goes, I don't know, a lot of sayings are coming to my mind right now, but, the game is to be sold, not told, right? So for somebody to actually pay you to come work for them and give you the game is like very contradictory to how things operate normally in our society, which is extremely capitalistic. So I'm sure you were very grateful for that, for the game they gave you.
Dude, I tell people all the time, like, even though I don't work for Unedited directly, at the moment. You know, I currently work for a company called Story Things, which is a content production research agency in Brighton, UK. Shout out to the guys over there. If Unedited call me right now and say, yo, Chris, can you come and help us with this? I'll go. Because they put me in a position where I could feed my family and take care of my wife. Like, the industry was cruel. They weren't the first people telling me, Sydney, I had a rough time on my entry to the industry. Like, you know, there was gatekeepers, there were bullies, people who would speak down on you or make you feel like you should be grateful to be here. So I'm going to verbally abuse you every chance I get. But those guys took me in and showed me the game to the point where I had people offering me jobs. I had to turn work down. And say, you know what, respectfully, I can't do it because I'm over here. They created a role for me after a while. So that one call I got January 2022, we've got this project. We heard you're available. When can we need you to start. When do you need me? Can you start now? Sure. Worked on my first BBC project and I was there for 2.5 years. And I'm still producing work for them now. Just did pilot season. Breaking Atoms put out an audio documentary today about the making of the Food album by MF Doom. It's a co-production with Breaking Atoms and Unedited. Like, they really, really ushered me into the game. So no matter where I go in this world or where I go on earth, I don't care what awards, rewards, whatever they give me, you cannot tell the story of Christopher Mitchell as an audio producer without mentioning Unedited. It's impossible. And it was a black-owned company. Yeah, black-owned. So you got to remember, I'm 42. Most of my life, I've worked in offices where I'm the minority. You know, I'm tense, I'm code switching, I'm thinking of what to say and over-explaining and over-pronouncing. Do you know what I mean? Now I'm working on Unedited, you know, you can come on the call and if you got a do-rag on because you're trying to get your hair done or, you know, keep your hair nice, it's fine. I remember the first time I spoke to Bernard and he said, "How you doing, King?" I looked over my shoulder. I'm like, is he talking to me? I had never been called that in the world of work before. So it was a totally different experience. It was tense. It was tense in the sense of the workload was intense and a lot was required of us. But it was fun. It was definitely fun, and it helped me learn the game and get me to where I am now, where I'm talking to you.
Man, that's gotta be rewarding, man. Because I just from me doing this podcast, 15 episodes of the podcast, you know, focusing like I was adamant. I debated with myself. Do I want to? And then in my tagline, do I want to include the black part? I'm thinking long term. Like, is this going? I'm like, nah. I just started. I can't sell it already. I got, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm like, I cannot, like, I made a promise to myself. I'm like, the things that you see in regards to that arena, you know, like the sellout word gets thrown around a lot, but just not like you having that true idea, but modifying it because, it's going to look more appealing to this group of people or that group of people. And you start deviating. And then when things don't work out, it was like, well, this was never really the plan. Like this, the true core ethos essence of why you wanted to do something. Like I feel like I have to go into this and sticking with that. So for me to just do this on a level with the podcast, but for you to do it on that level, and then, you know, with the back end of unedited and the experience and being able to be yourself, and, you know, like if it's mostly black people around, like it's going to cater to us and it's going to be authentic. It's going to be our real lived experience. So I'm sure that was very rewarding.
Absolutely. And oh man, it was amazing. And you know what's really good, Sydney, is that even though I'm not at Unedited anymore and I work for Story Things, the team over there is still very diverse. It's not an all black team, but the confidence that Unedited gave me to be myself in work, even when I'm not working for them, I've brought it to Story Things and it's been embraced. It's been championed over there. You know, Hugh, Matt, Angeli, the whole team just let me rock. I am who I am and they love me for that. And they give me the opportunities where I don't feel like I got a code switch anymore. I am here because you want me here and you want to work with me and I want to work with you. So, you know, I'm saying this with a smile on my face. I'm in a very, very, very fortunate and blessed position because I don't fear Monday mornings anymore. I get to wake up and do what I want to do and change the world through storytelling from this little laptop in my house in Northwest London. Man, like, well, you know, life is good.
Yeah, I mean, you decided to use the storytelling avenue to do that, and I feel like that's one of the most powerful things. And just to back up a little bit, not necessarily about your timeline, but kind of more of a creative question, because you mentioned you're a rapper. Obviously, you started producing and getting into this realm. But I'm curious to know, and hopefully the listeners are too. Is like, what is your creative process like? Like I. Well, let's start with that because I would say that was your most powerful outlet at some point. Like, how did you, what was what was your process for that? Are you somebody who can just go in and just write it out? Or are you kind of planning in the head, or do you get randomly inspired? And then your process for that, like, was there some carryover to what you do now, or is it like a whole different creative process? And how it ties into, because I get the feeling that you are a holistic person. Like, you want to, how one thing connects to another. So how is your creative process affected by your lifestyle? Do you go on walks? Are you adamant about, like, I can't work, I'm not going to work 10 hours in a row. I'm going to work 5 and take a break and recharge so I'm fresh and work another 5. Like, what is that like for you?
I feel like you know me already. So, with my creative process with rapping, so I started writing on paper. So 92, all I had was pen and paper. But what happened was, because of my church background as well, and having to memorize scriptures and all these kind of things, I developed a really strong memory. So when Jay-Z came out and was like, he don't write things down, he writes it in his head, and people were like, oh, how could you do that? That's impossible. I'm there thinking, yeah, it makes sense because I know people who do that, because I can do that. Even though I don't do it all the time, but I can do that. I've written songs in my head, walking down the street mumbling. People think I'm mad, but I'm creating. With me and, my process, yes, I can just write stuff down and go in and record, but I think I write my most powerful and long-lasting music when I have space to think and breathe and just articulate my thoughts. I'm a thinking person. There are people out there who can be spontaneously creative and create something amazing, and it works, and that's them, and I envy them because I wish I could do that. I can't. I need time to cook. I need time to marinate. My creative stuff is like soul food, man. The meat needs to sit in the flavors for a bit. Do you know what I mean? And that's also not been a good thing, because sometimes I overthink things and I get caught up in perfectionism. So recently, what I'm learning to do is to put creative restrictions on myself. So it might be, okay, Chris, you're gonna write a verse in an hour. Whatever that verse is in at the end of the hour, that's what it is. You go in and record it, and then you tweak and improve the next time. So it's a similar approach with podcasting. If I can hear a verse or a song in my head when the beat plays, it's the same as if I can hear a podcast before we've recorded and edited. If I can read the synopsis and I can hear this podcast in my head, I can recreate what's in my head as a podcast. So you are 100% right in terms of how I work. I go on walks every single day. Sometimes twice a day. If it's a good day, I'll go on a walk 3 times a day. I just got back from a walk before we started calling. So I try to exercise as well, as much as I can. I'm not consistent with the exercising because I hate gyms, but I'm definitely consistent with walking. I think walking cleanses my mind and my brain. I'm fortunate to live in a part of the city where there's a lot of parks and a lot of green spaces. So I do like to put my headphones on and just listen to an album, go for a walk. I'm even learning to just take the headphones off, Sydney, and just go for a walk and absorb the environment and hear the birds, hear the trees, hear the cars, just being really, really intentional. That's a key part of my process. Sometimes I might be mulling around in the kitchen before I sit down and start because I'm formulating it in my head, the structure. I was just writing a synopsis for a podcast called Redemption Man. We can talk about that in a bit, which is my first factual narrative series. And I had to see the words in the air in front of me before I could commit them to paper. So think of it almost like a jigsaw puzzle, and you've got the pieces floating around in the air, and I put them together. It's the same with music, podcasting, writing essays. If I can see it before I do it, then I'm cooking.
That's dope, man. That's cool. Man, that's whew. So yeah, I have so I'll say this. I'm glad you mentioned the thing about I'm glad you shared your creative process, because for me, like, I undoubtedly know that what I'm doing now is my purpose, right? But I was having a conversation, I think I mentioned this on the pod before, with my girlfriend, who, well, she was like, because we do church every Sunday, where we study the word together and things, and she made a reference. I can't remember the exact reference, but she was like, I know you always talk about being your purpose, right? But your purpose is not only something, if it's really a purpose, it's not only going to benefit you, it's going to benefit the world and society. So I had to think about myself like, okay, I'm getting a lot out of this. What, is the bigger picture thing for the world? And for me, I would say, because I was an athlete growing up, I was never tapped into like my creative being, my creative ability that everybody has within them, whether it's exercise and whether it comes out or not, that's another story. But always a very, when I told you I tried to mess around making beats, I was always technical, very. I didn't have a connection or a feeling to a lot of things I was doing. I was just doing, like, I know how to shoot because somebody taught me how to shoot, so I can shoot well. But I didn't necessarily. I wasn't a player who had rhythm to his game and was out there like it was. It wasn't a form of expression for me. It was just something to do. So but as I became an adult and I wanted to explore that, and I did explore that, and I went through that process. I'm like, oh, this is something that, like anything, like you have to train it. If you want to be muscular, you have to lift weights. You have to lift the creative weight per se. So as well. So I realized that the connection between my purpose was I want to inspire others to tap into their creativity, whether it's audio, whether it's, I don't know, you're a dancer, whether it's, there's so many creative outlets. But I wanted to use my platform and what I do to inspire people to explore their creativity, and don't constrict yourself, and don't be afraid to do it, and put things out there and see what works and what doesn't, and what for you, and maybe inspiring others. So I'm glad you shared your process, because maybe that might be the first crack or opening of the door for somebody who's just starting on this creative journey, the one that you started so long ago. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, for sure. What you said is it's actually something I'm gonna have to sit with. Whilst what I do is enriching my life in a creative and a financial way. Is like, how am I enriching the world with my purpose and my gift? That's a really, really good question. I like to think that because I have the heart of a historian and a documentarian, filling in the gaps in history with my storytelling and creating time capsules and archives for future generations. That's my contribution to the world, because I'm big on that. I hate when people rewrite history because they want their own particular slant on it. What happened, happened. Tell it like it is. I'm big on that.
The truth is straightforward. When things start becoming complicated, that's because that's the fix is in.
Yeah, you gotta tell it how it is. You may not speak to that person, or you may not like that person, but are they part of the story? Yes. All right, so they gotta go in.
Right. Well, that's cool, man. I actually want to move forward, because you mentioned story things, and I do want to want you to share what you do now. But you may actually do that within the context of this next question. But what are some projects? I know you mentioned your baby. We dove deep into that. But what are some other projects that you've worked on? Because we all work on things that, stand out in our mind. They're memorable in some way. Was it the amazing people you work with? Was it the story? Was it the angle? Was it something else that made that particular experience stand out into your mind, something that you can retell like it just happened because it was so that impactful for you? So what are those couple of things that you worked on that really stand out in your mind?
Well, I have to think about my time at Story Things. I've been there for about 1 year and 3 months. When I went for the job, I was planning my dad's funeral. And the day I got the call for the job, there was so much going on, Sydney. So I was wrapping up his podcast at Spotify. It was the first wrestling podcast I ever worked on. And, I mentioned earlier in the interview how much I love wrestling. So that was like a dream project for me. My time on the project was coming to an end. I had just seen my dad's body. And then I get the call, you've got the job. So there was a lot of emotion in that few hours, that little window on that particular day. But, my time at Story Things, what it's done is that, yes, music and wrestling and pop culture are my passions, but it's really shown me worlds where you have to go from storytelling to story finding. There's a difference. So, for example, I'm currently working with a client called ADP, which is the world's biggest payroll provider. They work, I think, I don't even want to get this wrong. They're everywhere. I think they said...
I know they got like the it's like a white background with like red writing.
Yeah, so I produced their podcast, and it's called ADP Payroll Around the World. Now, to most people, me included, when someone says, "Yo, we're going to do a podcast on payroll," in my head, I'm thinking, "What?
How?
Like, huh?" So then you go from storytelling to story finding. So previously, before I got there, they did a series about your first paycheck. What did you spend your first paycheck on? So do you see how you can take this there's the story. So when, I felt even like, yeah, Chris, of course, that's a great story because I could say to you now, Sidney, what did you spend your first paycheck on? You got a story behind that. So with ADP Payroll Around the World, what we did is we came up with this global podcast where we speak to people, freelancers, from different parts of the world, different countries, and we speak to ADP experts from those particular countries to talk about the nuances in their countries around taxes, around freelancing, and all the different legalities. And Sidney, when I say I did not know the world of payroll was so exciting, dude, I found out that in Australia, right, if you get a new pet, you can get a certain amount of leave just to look after the pet. In Australia, I found out in India, part of their tax break system, you can use the time to go to a spa.
You know, it's not surprising. Well, I would expect none of these to be the United States because we don't operate like that. We don't give people those luxuries.
No, I've been to America. When I first went to America and I found that you guys only get 2 weeks off a year, my brain was rattled. I could not believe it. I'm like, yeah, this is capitalistic headquarters right here. So yeah, payroll, finding out what people spend their first paycheck on, all the differences in the different countries, that's story finding right there. We worked with a company called data.org, and they came up with, some systems around COVID, and, if there were a future pandemic, they've got this technology where they can predict and prevent. So I did a lot of sound design in my first animation project. And recently I've just started work, or when I say recently, in the last, 8 to 9 months, I've been working on prototypes. So all these ideas that I've got in my head, me and one of the directors, Hugh, we just produce ideas. But I mentioned before about a creative restriction. We have an idea, we might just spend 2 days on it. Whatever it is at the end of those 2 days, that's what it is. And then we can take these early ideas to different clients. So one of the prototypes I came up with is called Last Minute Game Changers, which is a podcast talking about ideas that came about in the last or the 11th hour that changed the world. So episode 1 is about text messaging. A lot of people don't know that text messaging was a throwaway idea. It was 2 engineers who wanted to test it in the mobile network, said, let's just send each other a message. Let me know if it works. Now imagine your life without text messaging or WhatsApp or Telegram or Signal.
So they didn't do it as a product. They just wanted to be able to talk to each other.
And then they realized, let's just put this out in the public. And look, and here we are, right? Another project that Hugh and I worked on was called Don't Snooze on Wrestling, a 9-minute daily podcast to get you up to date on everything to do in the world of wrestling. Why is it 9 minutes, Sidney? Because when you press snooze on your iPhone, it will not ring for another 9 minutes. So our thing is, you're going to get everything you need to know about the world of wrestling from the time you press snooze and your alarm goes off again. We've just launched a video series, or we were about to, called What Would You Do If You Weren't Afraid? So it's similar to like Humans of New York, where we speak to real people just about their vulnerabilities and their fears and their life story. And that's a video series that's coming out, and you'll just hear real people just talking about the lives they would have lived if fear wasn't a factor, and if they wouldn't be judged, and if they weren't scared of failure. So these are all the kind of things I'm thinking of that go out my usual hip hop sphere. But in many ways, it's still similar because the ethos remains. It's talking to real people who may necessarily be overlooked or marginalized, going deep and telling stories that would otherwise get buried beneath the surface, and just thinking outside the box. Like, you got this idea, do it. Let's see how it comes out. And that's one of the best things about working at Story Things. Not only are the people insanely smart over there, Sidney, those guys are smart, yo. Like, you need to be on your job when you're talking to them because they are smart and they're creative and they're savvy. But we just make stuff. That's what we want to do. We just make stuff, see how it works. And, we go to our clients with our research and with our findings, our thoughts. And I'm just having a ball over there. I'm having a ball.
I'm glad, man. It's actually refreshing to hear in the state of the industry now, because it's I don't know how it is over there, but here it's rough, man. There's a lot of talented people who or who have lack of opportunities, man, and it's not ideal, and people are having to scramble and do what they have to do to make it and to do what they got to do, take care of their responsibilities. But I know one thing, like the people who really love it, they'll figure it out. They'll figure out a way, whether they got to do this and, work a full-time job, work a part-time job, whatever. For the people who this is part of their life, this has to be a part of their life, they'll figure it out. And for those who not, hopefully they can find that thing that, they'll commit to, no matter what. But I think this is definitely probably going to weed out the people who aren't really about it. So, but I wish bad on no one.
Yeah, and Sydney, I'm fortunate and I'm blessed, and I realize that, as my career is good. It took me a while to get here. It took me a while, and I lost a lot, and it cost me a lot to get here. But I also remember that not everybody is in the position that I am, so I'm here to make the most of it. Those days when I'm tired or I don't feel like doing it, because it's not every day. I jump out of bed and say, yeah, let's get it. There's some days when you want to spend that extra hour in bed, but I'm here to really make the most of this time that I have left.
I'm glad you're an action taker, somebody who takes action and executes their ideas. And I think the silver lining in with these, as far as the system, not opportunities not being available, that was the genesis of me creating this podcast, because I got laid off and I'm like, I don't have a source of expression right now, creativity. Like I have to do something. So this was birthed out of that, and hopefully it'll, a lot of other people will, inspire them to like, okay, let me not rely on other people to come up with the ideas and to me to contribute. Let me come up with the ideas. Let me make the decisions and make me write the stories from the way that and the angle that I wanted to be told. And I think something ultimately good is going to come out of it. We're not going to be as reliant on outside sources. We're going to take things in our own hands, and we're going to be more collaborative with the people that are on our level and around us.
That's important. Collaboration is key. No man is an island. And, unfortunately, my experiences in terms of my community here in the UK, oftentimes, people want to be the first and only to do stuff. We ring fence information. We gatekeep people. Because I've seen people you let me know what you need and I'll go and speak to them. No. I remember when I bought my flat with my wife, and I sat there and I said, all the people I know in my community who have bought houses and apartments, etc. And there was no one I could go to for advice, because no one tells you everyone hides this information. Like, what's the difference between a leasehold and a freehold? I didn't know, because I was conditioned not to talk, not to share, don't collaborate, don't let anyone know what you're doing. Got to break out of that, man. We've got to share information and share opportunities.
Yeah, it makes it more equitable for everybody, really. So we absolutely did need to do that,
for
man.
Sure.
I appreciate all the game you gave away, and the people who gave you the game, because they didn't have to do it, and you didn't have to do it as well. So
and that's why it's important that I pay it forward. Anyone I can help. If it's 5 minutes over a coffee, or you need to jump on a Zoom call for 30 minutes, as long as I got the time, I'm gonna, the same way Bernard, Andrew, and Emma gave me the game, I will share the game.
Absolutely, man. That's beautiful. So we're gonna getting towards the end here, and we're gonna move on to the last section of the pod. He's prepared because he asked me a question regarding it off air, so I'm glad he did his homework. And it's just this portion just to get an idea of your taste, and what makes you feel something, what gives you a vibe, what's memorable to you. And I'm curious, man. So first question is, you've made a lot of references to many things previous, but I would ask that you reference things that we haven't mentioned, just to expand the horizons even more. But the first question is, favorite album of all time.
Sidney, I'm gonna be honest with you, man. When you sent me this question, I'm like, oh, why is he doing this to me? There's so many albums I like and love, but there's one album that comes to mind. It's a gospel album from Tremaine Hawkins. So for the benefit of the listeners here, Tremaine Hawkins is the former wife of Walter Hawkins. Walter Hawkins, he was the creator and founder of the Love Alive choir. The Hawkins family are gospel royalty. Edwin Hawkins wrote Oh Happy Day. That's Edwin Hawkins right there. So we don't need to go no further. The levels are set. Yeah, the Hawkins is them, right? But the reason why I love this live album by Tremaine is my mum used to play it a lot. I mentioned the fact that she was a choir director. She used to play it on VHS. So this is before cassette and CD. This is video cassette, the big black joints. And I remember being a kid, the music was incredible. There's songs on there like Cheer Up, Praise the Name of Jesus, The Potter's House, which is a duet with her and her husband, Walter Hawkins. But Sidney, the fact that Jesse Jackson opened up this gospel concert, I'm like, oh, she must be important. Like,
got a budget
Jackson. Either, budget or important. Jesse Jackson came, right? Dude, she had Stanley Turrentine on the organ. She had Carlos Santana on guitar. She changed her clothes 4 times in one show. So that let me know. I'm like, hold on, she's important. And it's an album that I've listened to repeatedly over the years. It's an album that reminds me of growing up. It reminds me of my mom. And it's such a pure and raw performance. The vocals are all on point. I don't even think there's a studio version of this album. They went and sang it one time and they nailed it one time. Tremaine Hawkins' live album. It was originally released in 1990 and it's on Spotify and Apple Music. Check it out.
Okay, I will, man. I'm gonna get you to all the like things that you mentioned. I always ask the guests to just include it in like an email so I can just make sure I can find it easily and all that good stuff. So and what that album was for you, the Share My World album by Mary J. Blige was, to me, reminds me of going on family vacations. This is when everybody drove anywhere. People weren't flying like that. We would drive to Atlanta, go to Braves games. We go to Disney World, go to the beach. But that album is just something that sounds out of my mind.
It's a great album. I love the song I Can Love You with Lil' Kim. That song is, in terms of hip-hop R&B collaborations, that's one of the best. Lil' Kim, yeah.
Yeah, that album, no skips, literally no skips.
My wife is a big Mary J fan, but her one is My Life. That's her joint.
Oh yeah, that's I'm gonna have to get that one on vinyl because I cannot find the Share My World one on vinyl at all. So I'm gonna have to settle for My Life, unfortunately, which is also great. It's also great, but it's very different. It's a little more hip hop than the Share My World. Share My World is more pure R&B.
For sure. And if I ever see the Share My World vinyl here in the UK, I'll pick it up for you and we'll sort it out.
Oh yeah, appreciate it, man. All right, next question. Favorite music producer?
2 come to mind: DJ Premier and Pete Rock. So DJ Premier has worked with Biggie, Nas, Jay-Z. He was half of Gang Starr with Guru. He is, when people think hip-hop music, they think DJ Premier. DJ Premier has soundtracked much of my young adulthood and childhood. You know a DJ Premier beat when you hear it. Here is someone who can work with Mos Def and then turn around and work with Christina Aguilera. Him. Pete Rock. I say DJ Premier and Pete Rock because it depends what day you ask me, man. Like... Pete Rock has produced for Nas, Common, Lords of the Underground, Freddie Fox, everyone, dude. Everybody. But I want to throw a wild hat in here, a wild card rather. Greatest of all time producers, a gentleman by the name of Jim Johnston. So if you grew up watching wrestling, Hulk Hogan's theme song, Ultimate Warrior, Jake the Snake Roberts, all those theme songs were produced by the great Jim Johnston. The Undertaker theme song. There's nowhere on earth you can go and you hear that boom. You know it's The Undertaker. Jim Johnston. Jim Johnston created music around characters and themes that became so synonymous with them that even when you don't see them, you just hear the music, you know who it's for.
Well, okay. All right. Next one is favorite film score or soundtrack.
Okay, so my favorite film soundtrack is Soul in the Hole. It's a soundtrack based on a documentary about a basketball coach. I think his name is Kenny Rogers. Let me double check. The soundtrack is so good. I only watched the documentary maybe a couple of years ago. Kenny Jones. And it talks about his relationship with his basketball players, particularly Ed Booger Smith. So the soundtrack was released on Loud Records in 1997, and it's a who's who of underground hip hop at that time. M.O.P., Common, O.C., Organized Confusion, Dead Prez made some of their earliest appearances on that project. Source Money. It is the soundtrack is so good, Sidney. It's like an album. The soundtrack is so good, you don't need to watch the documentary to appreciate the album. It's amazing. I love that album.
Those standalone, yeah, the ones that can stand alone, that's how you know they're legit. So I'll definitely check it out.
It's one of those. Soul in the Hole.
Cool. Soul in the Hole, got you. And last one, favorite TV theme song. And I saved that one for last, a little more little more whimsical.
For the Wire, Way Down in the Hole, sang by Domaje.
I never really got to The Wire. That's one of the ones that I...
My man, The Wire will affect you in way. Listen, season 4 of The Wire, where they looked at the school system, dude, that finale, I cried, man, because I know people who turned out like each one of those kids.
Mm-hmm. When they shut the school down?
Shut the school down. One of them turned into a killer. One of them turned into a drug addict. You know, one of them found their way out and ended up, you know, doing well academically. I know all those characters, man. I know all of them.
Some people make it out, but unfortunately everybody doesn't.
Right. So, you know, season 4, Way Down in the Hole, it's like an R&B, it's very soulful. You know, sometimes I just listen to that theme song and don't even watch an episode. I just listen to the theme song.
Okay, that's dope, man. Well, I appreciate you sharing your taste. Definitely some gems in there, things I'm gonna check out that I was not aware of. But before we wrap things up completely, can you just share a piece of advice for anybody who's looking to use the media or use a media platform or some type of platform to try to build something for themselves and express their creativity and be a great storyteller, man? What piece of advice would you give? And then after that, just share where people can find you online, how they can support what you got going on, and how they can stay connected with you.
Okay. So the piece of advice I would like to share with the audience is something that someone shared with me, even though they didn't share it as a piece of advice. They said it, but I stuck with it. I took it and I ran with it. A gentleman by the name of Sean Sitaro, who's a journalist, previously worked at Complex, he said to us on Breaking Atoms, he said, follow your own curiosity. And that's what I'm going to share with the audience. Follow your curiosity. There's things that you are passionate about, things you are interested, things you are curious about. It may not necessarily be the flavor of the month or the talk of the moment, but follow your heart and your passions wherever it may lead you. The reason why I'm here talking with you, Sidney, is because one day Sumit and I decided to tell the story of an album that we were very passionate about, which was Reasonable Doubt. And here we are talking, making podcasts, doing audio. You know, later on this year, I'm getting on a plane to come to the States to talk about podcasting because I wanted to tell the story of an album that I really loved. I mentioned before, I produced a series called Redemption Man, which is about a man who walked through the streets of West London carrying a cross. No one knew who he was. It's been a question that's been on the back of my mind for 25 years. I followed my curiosity and I made a podcast about it. I'm still working on the rest of the episodes, but the pilot was good enough that I've been shortlisted for the Wickers. So in 3 weeks, I'm going to Sheffield to pitch in front of a live audience, hopefully to win £15,000 at least to produce the rest of the series. This is all just me being curious, dude. There was no plan, no long-term strategy. I'm just curious. I'm nosy. You know, I want to know stuff. So my thing is to follow your own curiosity and be open as to where it will lead you.
And that's damn near gospel right there. I don't know if I can say damn and gospel in the same sentence, but it's damn near gospel because that's literally what happened in my case as well. So I don't think that can steer you wrong. It may the evolution of it may take you down many roads and paths, but there's a reason that curiosity is there. So
absolutely. And when I don't follow my curiosity and when it starts to get thought out and strategic, it goes wrong. Follow your curiosity. Be smart, be aware, and be mindful and be responsible, but follow your own curiosity.
Absolutely. Can definitely attest to that. All right, man. How can people find you on the internet and the socials and all that stuff and connect with you if they reach out to you?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can find me at I Am Kinetic. That's IAMKINETIK. And you can find Break the Atoms on all the social media platforms, Break the Atoms. And just search Breaking Atoms wherever you listen to your podcast. If you like really good hip-hop conversation, our thing is we break it down to the very last compound. We don't just talk about music and hip-hop music. We talk about, you know, the social issues, the political issues that surround and come from the music as well. So it's like an audio version of The Source magazine, if you're old enough to know what The Source is.
Okay, cool, man. I'll check it out. I'm definitely gonna type into the pod after this conversation. But I appreciate you coming on, man, especially with the time zone difference. I know that can be a little tricky, but this is a great interview, man. And for everybody listening, I hope you got a lot out of it. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode, and please don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. If you want to know more about me, visit soundbysid.com, and I'm Sid Evans Jr. on Instagram and Threads. If you want to know more about the podcast, visit soundbysid.com/podcast. And if you'd like to see and hear more from our guests, subscribe on YouTube at Beyond the Threshold Pod and follow on TikTok at _Beyond the Threshold.